The recently crowned Hall of Famer, and also in a much, I think, for the Star City Games audience, if you didn't ever see him play on the Pro Tour, you probably saw him doing well in the Star City Games Open Series.
Yeah, he pretty much is like averaging making top 8 in all of the Opens that he plays, and it's just been a fearsome competitor on the Open Series really this year starting out. His opponent, Josh Glantzman, playing Rug Delver.
Now, Sneak and Show versus Rug Delver, we have a combo deck that in many ways is reminiscent of the old Tricks deck. Tricks, that Necropotence combo deck that would get the combo Illusions of Grandeur donate. And why I find that similar is you'd drop a Necropotence, draw a million cards, and you'd get a Force of Will in there. You'd protect the combo, and then you draw a million cards again. And that happens with Gristlebrand here from William Jensen. Josh Glantzman with Rug Delver is the representative of the aggro control sense of the archetype. Expect to see Tarmogoyfs and Delver of Secrets from him, trying to kill his opponent before his opponent can assemble the combo.
And 2 young Pyromancers. That's been a fringe card on Legacy. We saw them, or we did not actually see them, but we heard about the Young Frankenstein deck being played by Todd Anderson, featuring Young Pyromancer and a Reanimator shell. So here we've got 2 copies of Young Pyromancer and Josh Glantzman deck. That card didn't quite take Legacy by storm, say the way Deathrite Shaman did, but still a piece of the puzzle right now. People still trying to figure out the best way to use it.
A lot of people have called Young Pyromancer the red Snapcaster Mage. And what they basically mean by that is a card that can supply a chain of card advantage. A Snapcaster, very good card. Young Pyromancer, still, as you said, trying to prove itself, but definitely getting a little bit of a toehold in the format.
Yeah, and many people consider it to finish the cycle of great 2-drops in Legacy. Green, Tarmogoyf, black, Dark Confidant, blue, as you said, Snapcaster Mage, white. Probably go with Stoneforge Mystic, although Thalia is very good.
We see these 2 players both starting out with some library manipulation. William Jensen starts with Ponder, Josh Glantzman with Brainstorm. Now, Josh, for his part, would certainly prefer to have a clock on the table, but I think he is happy to be seeing, without that clock, the counter magic he has in hand. Huey now casting Preordain.
Yeah, Josh really has to respect the explosiveness of the Sneak and Show deck, able to power things out quickly off of Ancient Tombs, City of Traders, possibly even Lotus Petals. So before he commits a threat to the board, he wants to make sure that he leaves some kind of disruption up in case William Huey Jensen has the nut draw.
Okay, you can see that there was a sneak attack in Huey's hand.
So Huey there paused when he fetched, seeing if Josh was going to stifle the fetch land. It was clear. All clear.
You can see Lotus Petal, another Brainstorm, sneak attack.
So having to crack his fetch before the Brainstorm there. Now casts a Lotus Petal as defense for Preordained, play around Daze.
And you can see that Emrakul in his hand. And he puts an Emrakul on the bottom and leaves the other card on top, drawing it. Josh Glantzman with Force of Will. I think that's a Young Pyromancer in his hand. Can't quite make it out. Yeah, that looks like a Young Pyromancer. Wasteland. And a Spell Snare. Very few targets for Spell Snare in Jensen's list.
I would go
Daze?
with... Yeah.
Daze is it.
Not the greatest for this matchup, so...
Well, Josh can toss it to a Force of Will. And to be fair, Jensen might alternate casting cost his Daze, so that Spell Snare could come into play. A lot of counter magic in Josh Glantzman's list. Let's just count for the sake of argument Stifle among them. That would be 4 Stifle, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Spell Snare, 4 Daze, 4 Force of Will.
So he's got both Spell Pierce and Spell Snare, 2 of each.
We see a Delver finally drawn by Josh Glantzman. Wasteland in his hand. I see a Force of Will, a Spell Snare. I think I saw a Stifle in there. Young Pyromancer. Land, it's a Wasteland. Taps Young Pyromancer. Does that work?
Sure. So this 2-1, whenever Josh casts instant or sorcery, he's going to get a 1/1 elemental token.
You can see it right there. The goggle-wearing young pyromancer.
Young Chandra, really. A disciple of Chandra. Why do these pyromancers all wear goggles? Don't they know that the goggles, they do nothing?
I don't know. You can see a classic brainstorm there from William Jensen. Both these players are 3-0. 19 life apiece right now.
Trying to lock up an undefeated record on day 1 here in Legacy. After this, we will play 4 rounds of Standard at the Invitational. Tomorrow, same thing, 4 rounds Legacy, 4 rounds Standard, and also a Standard Open.
2 lands placed back on top of Jensen's deck. You can see the Gristlebrand in his hand. He's got another Lotus Petal, another land. Lays a Scalding Tarn, passes the turn. And Josh Glantzman now able to start attacking for the first time.
Attacking and generating some elemental tokens.
A second Delver of Secrets drawn by Josh Glantzman. He attacks for 2. Jensen drops to 17. And it looks like he is going to add a little bit to his clock.
1 Delver. Do you commit both Delvers here?
I don't like that idea at all. I like having a little bit of blue open so that you are not only running Force of Will for defense.
Yeah, because Huey's been crafting his hand carefully. Multiple Preordains, a Ponder, and a Brainstorm. You have to believe he's got the combo in hand at this point.
And we see a Wasteland activated by Josh Glantzman. Jensen puts a mana into his pool. Josh has already attacked this turn. So if he passes it, that means he's going into his end step. And that mana just goes away. Long-time players realize mana burn has long been gone. So
Yeah.
if you're just getting back to us and you're coming back to Magic, and why didn't he lose a life? Well, mana burn doesn't exist anymore.
I would love if we had a poll, and maybe we can just ask Twitter, have you ever played with mana burn? At this point, maybe there are a lot of people who haven't. So if you have no idea what mana burn is, let us know at #SCGINVI.
And you should also be following at SCG Live. Join in the conversation. We definitely pay attention to Twitter here, so make sure that you do as well. If you had been, you would know right away when Cedric Phillips, for example, had already gotten his first couple of wins in the tournament. We see Jensen here, fetches a land, lays another Lotus Petal, lays another land. Here comes the sneak attack.
Now we're going to have a fight. A counter war.
Starting with Spell Pierce. And he remembers his trigger. Young Pyromancer creates an elemental.
So Josh, Spell Pierce. Huey fires back with a Spell Pierce of his own. Well,
Force of Will, Spell Snare, Delver of Secrets, and Lightning Bolt in Josh Glantzman's hand. And we see the Force of Will tossing the snare. Pardon me, if I didn't say Spell Snare, that was the other card. So now he is left with a Delver and a Lightning Bolt in hand. And Jensen passes the turn.
Oh. So Josh dodges the first bullet there.
Oof. Brainstorm revealed to Delver of Secrets. It flips. Currently, there is 7 power of attackers on the table. And with that Bolt and Brainstorm, Jensen, after this turn, will have only 1 turn to win the game. Here comes the 7 damage. Jensen drops to 9.
And he used up all of his Lotus Petals there on that turn to play out the sneak attack and then play his Spell Pierce. So he currently does not have enough ammunition left to go with another sneak attack. He's going to need a show and tell, and really he would need to survive a turn after show and telling either Emrakul or Gristlebrand.
And we see from this a Tarmogoyf, a Daze, and a fetch land drawn by Brainstorm. He does put a token into play for the young Pyromancer. He keeps a Daze. Daze very good on his mana-hungry opponent.
Always remember your triggers, kids. Josh Glantzman with 3 1/1 elemental tokens.
And
Yeah,
Jensen with that draw, there is no way out. He has no counter magic in hand. He can put a sneak attack into play, but that's not going to be enough. He will die to the swing back, and he does not have enough mana to do anything else besides just cast a sneak attack.
But with Josh representing 8 power on the board, yep, and there you go. He packs it up.
Yeah, he's representing 8 power, and Huey packs it up the moment Josh, at the end of turn, taps for the bolt.
Yeah. The lightning bolt and, you know, the incidental 1/1 token he gets, able to finish things off. So Josh Glantzman wins the first game in this round 4 matchup with Hall of Famer Huey Jensen, and now perennial Star City Games Open Series top 8er as well.
And from the sideboard, Josh Glantzman has access to one of the most important and powerful sideboard cards that has existed in Magic's history, Red Elemental Blast. He's got 3 copies of that card, a very good weapon in counter Magic Wars. Obviously, Red Elemental Blast can't stop a sneak attack, but it can stop the Force of Will, or the Spell Pierce, or the Daze that is backing it up. Also, aside from that, he has Flusterstorm, which is also quite solid in this matchup. And if he wants to really dig deep, Surgical Extraction is a possibility as well.
Well, Huey also has access to 2 Red Elemental Blasts. He also has 3 copies of Blood Moon in his deck, and Rug Delver, like many of the Delver decks we see in Legacy, has no basic lands in its mana base. So that's another angle of attack that Huey can take, cut Josh off of all non-red mana. That just leaves Josh with, you know, lightning bolts and alternate cast Force of Wills, really.
If you're just joining us, I'm Adrian Sullivan here with Ricky Hayashi. We just saw Josh Glantzman win Game 1 versus William Huey Jensen. And you brought up the sideboarding possibilities for Jensen. Blood Moon is a card you mentioned. Blood Moon, very powerful against Josh Glantzman's deck, as Josh has 0 basic lands. There are very few basic lands in this archetype in general. But one of the interesting things about a card like Blood Moon is that even though it turns off all of the mana, sometimes it can come to the party too late to really influence the outcome of the match. So it's a very interesting sideboard card in that it's a knockout punch against Delver, but you have to live long enough for it to matter. And, you know, it's not like Josh Glantzman is just going to sit there and let it happen. On the other hand, the other way to think about it is you can drop that as a challenge to your opponent to stop it, and if they do, then on the subsequent turn, follow up with the kill.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously doesn't win the game on its own, Blood Moon, but what it does do is it shuts down. We saw that game. Josh had Spell Pierce. We saw him pitch the Spell Snare. So Huey knows that Josh has multiple types of counter spells, and just cutting off some of them should be enough to give him a window on a follow-up turn after resolving a Blood Moon.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's just that one thing that people sometimes forget is that little bit of cost. There's that time you have to spend to do so. Now, Jensen's list, you've been seeing, I think, with a lot of the lists that are the no-end-tell lists, a kill that involves Enter the Infinite. This list is the one that precedes that. The Sneak and Show lists, they kill with Emrakul and Gristlebrand, cheating them into play in some manner, whether it's Show and Tell or whether it's Sneak Attack. And the thing about this strategy, Gristlebrand in play is just incredible. It's just an incredible card. And this is the way I was comparing this to the old list Tricks, which was a Necropotence combo deck. Gristlebrand acts much the same way, where that once it's in play, you can draw the Force of Wills to protect yourself.
Yeah, Gristlebrand on its own doesn't really do enough. You know, in a deck like this, you would expect things that go for one-shot kills, like Blightsteel Colossus, right? And Emrakul doesn't usually kill in one shot, but it wrecks all their permanents with Annihilator. Gristlebrand is really more for follow-up, like you said. You get a Gristlebrand on the board, sneak or showing it, and then you really go off after that.
And Jensen likes his hand, says keep.
Can you read his expressions?
You know, I've played against Jensen a number of times, but he's actually very hard to read, mostly because he knows that he's being read when people are trying to read him. He's like one of the classic old-school best players.
Yeah, very stoic. And even when you just talk with him in casual conversation, stuff that he's excited about. You know, like obviously he's excited to become a Hall of Famer, Magic Pro Tour Hall of Famer, but he just kind of has a nonchalant, yeah, it's a nice ceremony.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting is that um, when Jensen got his start, he was a young guy, and a lot of people thought he was a little bit of a hothead. And the thing was, he was a teenager,
Yeah.
And these days he's still playing the game. He came back after a bit of a break, and you can really see that maturity on him now. You're talking about the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame mattered a lot to him, and the people that are on the Hall of Fame all talk about what an honor it is to be on the Hall of Fame. And I know that when he was elected into the Hall of Fame, that it meant a lot to him. But even now, when you talk with him about it, it's one of those things. He still has that kind of mature sense of humility to him. Even though he is considered one of the best players of all time, you don't feel like he comes to the game with that kind of arrogance that a lot of people associate with that youthful play. We see a ponder on turn 1 from William Jensen.
And Josh Glantzman did mulligan. He's down to 6 cards, which are Ponder, Brainstorm, Volcanic Island, Stifle, Wasteland, and something else.
Now
Huey takes a look at his Ponder hand.
City of Traders amongst there, but he puts that all the way down 2 cards, so it's 2 more draws before he'll see it. Lots of counter magic there, though.
So he's possibly setting himself up to go off on a big turn with that City of Traders.
Another Ponder. We see a Gristlebrand amongst those cards. Daze, is that?
Daze, Gristlebrand, and that City of Traders. Maybe he'll keep putting it at the bottom. Oh, this time he's got shuffle.
While he shuffles, you asked earlier about the question of mana burn. Do people know what it is? Well, it's interesting because a lot of people remember it, and they are glad it's gone. Memory Lapse Guide says he meant that he won many matches in Legacy Grand Prix because of mana burn, but he's still glad it's gone. And Femtact says, I have no idea what it is. Just to answer your question, what is mana burn? Ricky, what is mana burn?
Mana burn, it used to be when you floated mana in your pool and didn't use it at the end of the phase or step, you would lose a life for each leftover mana in your pool.
Yeah.
So it was not strategically sound usually to just float mana for no reason back in the day.
We have Ancient Tomb added to the table. Ancient Tomb, one of the many double mana lands that has been printed in Magic's history, wildly considered too good.
So Jerry Thompson, we've been talking about him all weekend, 2-time invitational winner, new Wizards of the Coast R&D member, on his way, driving to Seattle, stopping by in Indianapolis. He is now 4-0, Adrian.
Wow.
Trying to make it a third, trying to cement his place in Open Series history as the best.
Now, in this match in play, Josh Glantzman on his turn wastelands the cheaty mana of Ancient Tomb, and Jensen replaces it with a Volcanic Island. Now we see on Josh's main phase a main phase Brainstorm, Delver, Tropical Island, and Delver drawn. I don't know if I see any kind of shuffle effects. There might be one fetch land in there, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, probably the second from the left. Looks like a fetch land.
It could be. It's way at the back of his hand. Yeah.
So Huey here exposed his ancient tomb to that wasteland early, and that's the thing with Sneak and Show decks. Often you want to hold off on playing the soul lands, the 2 mana producing lands, until you absolutely need it, especially against a deck like Rug Delver. Exposing it to wasteland, he loses his ancient tomb really without getting any benefit out of it.
And Glantzman lays that Tropical Island we mentioned earlier. He put back on top of his library a Stifle and a Delver.
And now Huey is stuck. He has to brainstorm, looking for lands and looking for some way to shuffle. And he might have found both.
Yep, he's got a Ponder, he's got a City of Traders, and I think I might see a second Ancient Tomb in his hand as well. Now, Brainstorm, of course, one of the most commonly seen cards in Legacy. Some call it the glue. Other people call Force of Will the glue that keeps this format
Depends on
together.
your definition of glue. I think for both of those cards, they're very important to Legacy, but what do you mean by glue, right? The card that holds the format together, presumably.
Force of Will, probably.
Yeah, I would say Force of Will because it contains all of the combo decks.
We see Jensen uses a Misty Rainforest Stifle from Josh Glantzman and a Red Elemental Blast, fighting over the ability to shuffle away these cards that Jensen put on top. Is Josh Glantzman willing to do a fight over this?
Well, if Huey thinks it's important enough to Red Elemental Blast it, I think you have to respect that and say, oh, well, if you think this is important, I think it's important.
We see the days.
Yeah, not going to get much better chance to day something than right there.
And Jensen passes the turn back. This is a good opportunity now for Glantzman to do something. I mean, he might think the coast is clear. Is he going to lay... Okay, Delver of Secrets and the land. He relays the tropical island that he had returned to his hand for the days, and now it's back to Jensen. Jensen lays City of Traders, 3 mana, sneak attack. Does this one work?
So that's why you want to sandbag your soul land. Is Josh thought the coast was clear. Huey needed that Misty Rainforest, he thought, and he wanted to keep him off that mana, and then all of a sudden jump from 2 to 4, sneak attack.
And we see a Stifle drawn by Josh Glantzman, flipped the Delver into the Insectile Aberration. He knows the secret. Ponder, looking for some sort of pressure and or answer. He has that Stifle in hand. Yeah, so if there is not one more red mana source, Jensen's activation of sneak attack could be stifled, and he would have to wait a full turn. But you know what? Jensen's at 19 life.
That's too high. Yeah, Josh Glantzman sees a Brainstorm, Misty Rainforest, and Nimble Mongoose off with a Ponder. Even if he grabs that Mongoose, just not really enough damage. The Stifle is only 1 turn.
Right. He can stifle the Gristlebrand's draw 7. He can stifle the Emrakul's triggered Annihilator ability.
Yeah, those are useful.
I mean, the thing about that sneak attack, the creature doesn't get to stick around, so... Attack for 3 with the Insectile Aberration, and I think we're going to see perhaps another Delver of Secrets join the table.
So you're saying you would let Huey resolve the sneak attack effect and stifle the follow-up for whichever creature?
I think I would stifle the effect, because, I mean, Huey is not on the ropes here.
Yeah, because even if it's Gristlebrand, you stifle once, he can still activate a second time with his life total.
But he can do it the next turn. You know what I mean? Like, the card is still in hand, is it not?
Oh, if you stifle the sneak attack?
Yes.
Sure.
So, I mean, you're just delaying it for a moment, at least by stifling the ability. Then the card is gone. You'll take the hit from the creature, and the Gristlebrand will still be... If it's the Gristlebrand, it'll still be terrible for you. But at the very least, it's gone. You know, it's not going to be there next turn. If Huey was lower, I think the other stifle might make sense. But right now, being at 16 life, only having either 4 or 6 damage on the table.
Yeah. I mean, if it's Emrakul, then stifling the Annihilator is really enough. But Josh doesn't want to take a chance.
Yeah, he stifles the ability. Jensen does Force of Will, and goodbye to the board.
Boom.
Glantzman also decides that's enough for me. I've got nothing left in play. How about we go to the next... If I'm scooping these all up anyway, let's just go to the next game.
Yeah. Annihilate your board. Josh is still alive, technically, but really not doing much at that point.
We see Josh going back to his sideboard. Remember, one of the
players.
Yeah, one of the things that's happening, it's always worth thinking about what changes on the play or the draw. Is there anything that you need to be considering?
Yeah, days much better on the play than on the draw. Is that something? Maybe you don't take all of them out, but some number of them when you're on the draw, and then put them back in when you're on the play. Huey possibly thinking the same thing. And
now we saw
shuffling.
We saw how we had that moment where there was a counterspell war, and Huey lost it. And it was a counterspell war over a fetch land.
Yes.
And one of the things, Josh Glantzman won that counterspell war, but that left him completely defenseless on the following turn when Jensen attempted to drop a sneak attack, and it happened. Now, another thing I was just thinking about when I watched Josh Glantzman's play so far, he has yet to drop a turn 1 threat. And in fact, he's actually slow rolled his threats um, in order to maintain having blue mana open pretty much at all times.
Yeah, because he's got Stifle in his deck. That's one
Yeah.
of the problems with Stifle is in this matchup, I think you want to get something out on the board quickly, whether it's Delver of Secrets or Nimble Mongoose. Try to grow those creatures, try to get some early damage in, but if you have a Stifle in your hand, you're almost pot committed to leave that up just in case your opponent has a fetch land.
Well, and every turn that you do it, you're more yeah, it's as you say, a pot commitment, right? But like here we have a question of Jensen as someone who's sideboarding, a very experienced player. He's starting to take note, I think, of the way in which Josh plays this cautious game. And I'm curious if he changes his sideboarding because of the extra caution that his opponent's playing. To me, that makes it even easier to be a little bit more slow and reactive from the Jensen side, because you can expect it's possible you'll have 1 or 2 more turns happen because of the caution your opponent is putting into the game.
And here Glantzman immediately goes to fetch, so either committing a creature or some kind of sorcery search effect. Might see a Ponder here. Nope, it's Delver of Secrets, so this game, either he didn't have the Stifle or he decides the game plan is aggression. On the play, getting a turn 1 Delver could be very powerful and put Huey on a quick clock.
This is one of the most important, look at that, turn 1 Ponder, he almost casts it, he plays the Lotus Petal first, just playing around at days. But having a clock on the table immediately is one of the most important things. I think that Josh would have played a turn 1 Delver in any situation, but I think his turn 2 Delver, his turn 3 Delver, it looked like he was playing a little bit more slowly on that. We see the Stifle, flips the Delver of Secrets, it's now an Insectile Aberration. Land, go, and I saw at least a Red Elemental Blast, a Spell Pierce, I'm not sure what else.
And here you go. Now Huey is under pressure. A 3/2 flyer swinging down. He's seen the Stifle, so he has to be wary of that. He does have multiple fetch lands, but if he runs one of those into Stifle, he's losing a turn.
And we see a Ponder. Now Josh Glantzman's hand, amongst all the other cards, Red Elemental Blast, Stifle, Spell Pierce, Force of Will, that is a nightmare hand.
All backing up a turn 1 Delver that flipped immediately. That's really the key to this deck. It used to be just Nimble Mongoose, but that took so long to grow into 3 power, you know, to get to Threshold. The Delver of Secrets immediately, you know, if you're lucky on turn 2, bam, there you are.
If you're just joining us, it sounds like we've got new news. The recently crowned champion of Grand Prix Louisville, Brian Brondwin, he has just gone to another win. What was the record then?
It's 4-0.
4-0.
That's a pretty good hot streak there. Brian Brondwin, a fantastic human being and competitor. He almost didn't make it to Pro Tour Dublin.
We see an envelope in his hand. Not envelope.
I still pronounce it envelope sometimes by accident. Okay,
He's sending a message to Jensen with that envelope.
message is no.
Envelope, you can see it there. This is an older spell. Very powerful against a card like Show and Tell, which, for that matter, the Ponders, the Preordains, but like the Show and Tell, oftentimes what Jensen wants to do is put a threat together with a very small amount of mana, and this is a very cheap answer.
Yeah, I'm still surprised that it's not Spell Pierce, though.
Well, he does still have the Spell Pierces in his main deck, and in for 3 again, as well as cards like Flusterstorm, so. See, 11 life for Jensen.
Yeah, this is all that turn 1 Delver Secrets flipping on turn 2, putting Huey under a moderate amount of pressure here. He has to start thinking about when he wants to go off. He has assembled quite a bit of mana now. He does have the sneak attack. He does have the show and tell.
Hey, Josh Glantzman, he's got him on a 4-turn clock. And that's even if you know, he fetches, it's still a 4-turn clock, but a lightning bolt would make it a 3-turn clock. So right now, Huey's just got to be thinking about how much time does he have. I mean, the clock is ticking down, but there's still time.
Yeah, Rug Delver decks do have lightning bolts to potentially shorten the clock. Most likely not after board, but maybe you leave a couple of Miser's copies in to finish things off.
We see a land and pass. At this point, Josh Glantzman can cast, because of the Force of Will, potentially up to 4 counterspells in a single turn.
That's a lot of counterspells. And we saw earlier today in round number 3, Brad Nelson had to fight through a similar amount of hate versus Max Teets. Max had a red Elemental Blast and 2 Force of Wills, then a Force of Will on the following turn.
We see Jensen drop to 6 life here, a mere 2 turns from death. Looks like he might be making the early stages of going for it.
You have to. I think this is the turn he has to go for something. And it's not going to end well against 4 counterspells.
Well, I see at least 1 Force of Will in Jensen's hands, so I mean, he can at least put up a little bit of a fight. And we see the draw. There's a sneak attack in his hand. Jensen looking down at the table, trying to determine where to go from here. Look at that. He's like, oh, there's so many things that could go wrong here. If you've got a bolt, there's a blood moon he's looking at as well. That's interesting.
And you said this earlier, that blood moon may be too late here.
I mean, he can use this as a means to bait Josh Glantzman and hope that Josh has sideboarded out the bolts. Here it is. There's the bait. What do you think? Do you want to fight over this? This would mean that Josh Glantzman would only have Red Elemental Blast and Force of Will to fight any future Counterspell Wars with. This is a real card. I mean, he has to really consider whether this is something he can let resolve.
Well, I like using the Spell Pierce at least, right? That forces Huey to sacrifice the Lotus Petal.
And Josh is trying to think, can I let that resolve? Will I use one of my precious counter spells against it? The Spell Pierce pushed to the front of the hand.
But yeah, interesting that it would, if the Blood Moon resolves, it would cut off the Envelop, which we've been talking about a little. It's an answer to Show and Tell.
We see a fetch. I think we're going to see a tropical island probably here.
So this means he's
going to pierce it.
He's going to fight for it.
Yeah. There's the tropical. And the only spells that he has that can counter this are Spell Pierce and Force of Will. And Jensen's play here with this Blood Moon is saying, is my opponent the kind of guy who would leave in a lightning bolt? And he's saying, I don't think he's got a bolt. I think that what's going to happen here is we're going to fight. I'll win or I'll lose this fight, and then next turn I'll go for the win.
So Adam Boyd asks on Twitter, says, why are Sneak and Show decks not playing Swan Song?
You know, that's interesting you bring that up. I know that Brad Nelson earlier today was talking about Swan Song as a possible sideboard card, so it is in the mix. It's in the conversation. The thing is there's so many options that people usually end up picking. Well, we see the Force of Will, tossing, getting rid of the Stifle. Force of Will does get cast. But to finish answering that question, it's certainly a card that people are talking about, but there are so many cards it's competing with, it's just not necessarily a part of the automatically include list.
Yeah, because in this case, if Swan Song were one of the counterspells in Huey's arsenal, giving away that 2/2 bird could be game.
And we see down to 3 life. Lays a land. Josh Glantzman passes. This is going to be the crux of the match right here. That was a really interesting draw. City of Traders
almost
Wow,
single-handedly
really good.
nullifies that Spell Pierce.
We see sneak attack.
Wow.
Starting the fight.
So the oh my goodness, the fact that Josh Glantzman used the Force of Will last turn, now he doesn't have that hard counter for sneak attack. He's got Envelop, which only counters sorceries. He's got Spell Pierce, which doesn't do enough, and Red Elemental Blast can't counter the sneak attack, so he's forced to go with the Spell Pierce. Huey can just pay 2 if he wants, and then crack the Lotus Petal to get the red activation.
But one of the things to remember is that Jensen only has this turn. This is it. So he has to ask himself, if I pay this 2 mana, I'll have to sacrifice my Lotus Petal to activate the sneak attack. What if there's a Stifle? What if there's a Daze for the sneak attack? What if there is another Spell Pierce? There's a lot to consider here.
That is a lot to consider. You see he's got Emrakul and Gristlebrand. Gristlebrand really not in the picture here unless he just wants to gain 7 life. That's a possibility, though.
It looks like he's thinking about Force of Will here. Force of Will, down to 2. We're going to see the Red Elemental Blast, I believe. That doesn't cast Red Elemental. There we go. That casts Red Elemental Blast.
So he exiled Show and Tell to Force of Will, leaving himself with Spell Pierce. And now...
Now remember, Spell Pierce is still on the stack, so Jensen can let this Red Elemental Blast, for example, resolve, countering his Force of Will, and then just
pay 2 for Spell Pierce.
Pay 2 for Spell Pierce.
All right, yeah, let's make sure the stack. Yes, please. Love stacks. Okay, and there you go. That's the stack. It all started off with sneak attack. Huey Jensen going for his combo piece on the last possible turn, facing down Insectile Aberration. Josh Glantzman responded with Spell Pierce, which Huey has the ability to pay 2 mana for, but instead he chooses to Force of Will, trying to play around some follow-up answers. And Josh does have one of the follow-ups, Red Elemental Blast. That is the stack right now.
And we see Emrakul, Gristlebrand, both sitting in Jensen's hand. Looking at the permanents in play on Josh Glantzman's side of the table, only 5 permanents. So a sneak attack with Emrakul, should nothing else go wrong, would wipe Josh Glantzman's side of the board. And we see Force of Will is countered. Now the stack is just, he pays for the Spell Pierce.
Did you have the Stifle? That is really the only thing here.
He goes for it. Red puts Emrakul into play. Getcha? Is it a Stifle?
No. Annihilator.
Remember, he tossed the Stifle away.
Oh,
he tossed the Stifle away to the Force of Will just last turn.
So from Twitter, Matt Sperling says about the game situation, Huey Jensen's opponent with Red Elemental Blast, Envelop, Spell Pierce versus Sneak Attack and 7 mana. It's like 10,000 spoons.
Now, Josh Glantzman, if Josh had kept that Stifle, would have survived that turn.
There were a lot of different sequences to all of those counterspells he had that could have changed the outcome there. Going back to the turn before with the Blood Moon where he chose to use the Force of Will, I